The plasma bolt missed Katie's head by 3 inches. She didn't scream. She didn't freeze. The 9-year-old girl dove behind a cargo container as the second shot vaporized the spot where she'd been standing. Her father had drilled her for this. Every human child on Frontier Station learned the same lesson. When aliens shoot, you move. Boorah! The Varathi officer stepped forward, his chitinous armor gleaming under the station's overhead lights. His weapon hummed, charging for another shot. Katie pressed herself against the cold metal, her heart hammering in her chest. She could hear her mother's voice from 3 corridors away screaming her name. The officer rounded the corner, his compound eyes locked onto her small frame. He raised his weapon. Unauthorized movement in restricted zone, he clicked in translated speech. Compliance required. Katie held up her hands. I'm sorry. I got lost. The butt of his rifle cracked across her temple. She hit the deck hard. Blood ran warm down her cheek. The world spun. Through blurred vision, she saw the officer standing over her, his weapon pointed at her chest. He was saying something about protocols, about teaching Deathworlders their place, about making an example. Then her mother arrived. Lauren Grant didn't speak. She didn't negotiate. She crossed 15 meters in under 3 seconds, moving with the speed that made other species flinch. Her hand caught the officer's wrist. The snap of breaking chitin echoed through the corridor. The Varathi screamed. His weapon clattered to the floor. Lauren's other fist drove into his thorax with enough force to crack the armor plating. He staggered back. She advanced. Every movement was controlled fury, every strike calculated to inflict maximum damage without killing. The officer tried to raise his secondary arms. She broke those too. By the time station security arrived, the Varathi officer was on the ground, conscious but immobilized. Lauren stood over him, her daughter cradled in one arm, her free hand still clenched in a fist. Blood dripped from Katie's forehead onto the deck plating. The security chief, a Palaxian, approached cautiously. Citizen Grant, you need to. He struck my child, Lauren said quietly. Her voice carried the weight of a death sentence. File your report. Contact Earth. Tell them what happened here. The Palaxian's scales paled. Everyone knew what happened when you harmed a human child. Everyone knew what came next. Above them, the station's communication arrays were already transmitting. The message would reach Earth in 6 hours. The Varathi Confederation had no idea what they'd just started. The Varathi ambassador arrived on Frontier Station expecting an apology. He got Commander Jacob Price instead. Price stood in the station's main conference room, hands clasped behind his back, watching the ambassador's entourage file in. 6 Varathi diplomats, each wearing the traditional robes of their caste, their antennae twitching with barely concealed arrogance. They thought this was a negotiation. They thought humans would bend. Commander Price, the ambassador began, his translator rendering his clicks into smooth English. We understand there was an unfortunate incident involving one of our security officers and a human juvenile. We are prepared to offer compensation for... Sit down, Price said. The ambassador's mandibles clicked in irritation. Excuse me? I said sit down. All of you. Price gestured to the chairs. Because you're going to want to be seated when I explain what happens next. The Varathi exchanged glances. Slowly, they took their seats. Price remained standing. At 0800 station time, your officer struck a 9-year-old girl with enough force to fracture her skull. She required emergency medical treatment. She still can't hear properly out of her left ear. Price's voice was level, but something in it made the room feel colder. Your officer then attempted to justify this by citing protocol violations and Deathworlder containment procedures. The child was in a restricted zone, one of the diplomats started. Price's hand slammed onto the table. The sound cracked through the room like a gunshot. I wasn't finished. The diplomat's antennae flattened against his head. Here's what you don't understand about humans, Price continued. We have a rule. One rule that supersedes every treaty, every trade agreement, every diplomatic nicety we've ever agreed to. You don't hurt our children. Not ever. Not for any reason. The ambassador shifted in his seat. Commander, surely we can reach an understanding that Earth fleet is already en route. Silence fell like a hammer. I'm sorry, the ambassador managed. The UES Harbinger, the UES Absolute Zero, broke orbit from Luna Station 7 hours ago. They'll be here in 4 days. They're bringing the Third Fleet with them. Price leaned forward, his knuckles pressing into the table. 47 warships, 300,000 Marines, all of them very, very angry. The Varathi ambassador's exoskeleton seemed to pale. This is a gross overreaction to a minor... Minor? Price's laugh was sharp and humorless. Your people just declared war on humanity and you're calling it minor? We did no such thing. You struck a human child in front of her mother. In our culture, in our laws, in every part of what makes us human, Price straightened. Here's what's gonna happen. You have 72 hours to recall every Varathi officer, every diplomat, every citizen, from every human-controlled station and colony. After that, any Varathi found in our space will be detained indefinitely. You cannot be serious. Your officer is being transferred to Earth for trial. He'll face a human court, under human law, with a human jury. And Ambassador, Price's eyes were hard as diamond. Human law allows the death penalty for anyone who harms a child. The room erupted. The Varatha diplomats clicked and chittered among themselves, their translators spitting out fragments of outrage and disbelief. The ambassador rose to his feet, his robes swirling. This is barbaric. The Galactic Council will never stand for. The Galactic Council can file a complaint. Price walked to the door, then paused. One more thing. The mother who broke your officer's arms? She's been cleared of all charges. Self-defense. Protection of a minor. Any species wants to challenge that ruling, they're welcome to take it up with the Third Fleet when they arrive. He left them sitting there, their mandibles working soundlessly. In the station's medical bay, Katie Grant slept under sedation, her head wrapped in bandages. Her mother sat beside her, holding her small hand. Outside the window, stars gleamed cold and distant. Somewhere out there, warships were burning hard toward Frontier Station, their crews eager for justice. The Varathi Confederation was about to learn what humanity meant by family. The Galactic Council convened an emergency session 30 hours after the incident. Chancellor Vrix of the Palaxian Assembly called the meeting to order, his scales shifting through nervous color patterns. Around the circular chamber, representatives from 47 species watched the holographic display at the room's center. It showed real-time tracking data of the human fleet. They're not slowing down, Vrix said quietly. The Varathi delegate, a female named Shira, clicked her mandibles dismissively. They're posturing. Humans always posture. They won't actually. The display updated. 3 more battle groups had just left Earth's orbit. 81 warships now, the Kravan observer noted, his tentacles coiling with anxiety. They've mobilized 1/3 of their entire navy. For one child, Shira said. One juvenile. This is insanity. Is it? The voice came from the human gallery. Ambassador Elena Ross stepped forward, her boots clicking on the polished floor. May I address the council? Vrix hesitated, then gestured assent. The floor recognizes Earth's representative. Elena walked to the center of the chamber. She wore simple black, no ornamentation, no diplomatic regalia. Her face was carved from stone. You're all wondering if we've lost our minds, she said. You're calculating probabilities, running scenarios, trying to understand why humanity would risk a war over what you consider a minor assault. She turned slowly, meeting the eyes of each delegate. Let me explain something about Deathworlders. She tapped her wrist display. The hologram shifted, showing Earth. Verdant continents, blue oceans, beautiful and deadly. We evolved on a planet that tried to kill us every single day. Predators, diseases, weather that could freeze or cook you within hours. We survived because we developed one critical trait, tribalism. Fierce, uncompromising protection of our own. Elena's voice hardened. But we're not just tribal anymore. We've expanded that instinct. Every human is our tribe now. Every single one. That's hardly unique. Shira interjected. Many species value A human mother once lifted a 2-ton vehicle off her trapped child, alone, unassisted. Her muscles tore, her bones cracked, but she didn't stop until her baby was safe. Elena let that sink in. A human father once swam into a flooding river, fighting currents that would drown most species. To save his daughter, he succeeded, then went back for her dog. The chamber was silent. "We have a word in our oldest languages," Elena continued. "Mama bear, Papa wolf. It means that when you threaten our young, we stop being rational. We stop calculating costs. We become something else entirely. Something that won't stop, won't negotiate, won't rest until the threat is eliminated." She gestured at the fleet display. "Those ships, those Marines, they're all somebody's child. Somebody's sibling. And right now, they're protecting one of ours who got hurt. They won't turn back. They won't slow down. They won't listen to reason." Vrix leaned forward. "Ambassador Ross, surely there's a diplomatic solution?" "There was. Don't hit our kids." Elena's eyes swept the council. That was the solution. Simple, universal, easily understood. Your officer chose differently. Shira rose, her exoskeleton rattling. "You would go to war over discipline? Over a security measure?" "He fractured her skull," Elena said softly. The words dropped like stones into still water. "She's 9 years old. She weighs 30 kilograms. Your officer stands 2 meters tall and masses over 100 kilos. He hit her hard enough to cause permanent hearing damage. And you call that discipline? She was in a restricted zone. She got lost looking for a bathroom." Elena's composure cracked for just a moment. "She's a child, and your response was violence," the hologram updated again. The human fleet had been joined by independent colonial militias, freelance mercenary groups flying human flags, even civilian ships retrofitted with whatever weapons they could mount. "You wanted to know if we're serious?" Elena gestured at the swelling armada. "Every one of those ships volunteered. We didn't conscript them. We didn't order them. They came because they heard what happened. Because somewhere in their ship, there's a parent, or an aunt, or a brother, and they're thinking that could have been my kid." She turned to face Shira directly. "Your Confederation has 48 hours to hand over Officer Kreven, recall all Varathi from human space, and issue a formal apology directly to Katie Grant and her family. Those are the only terms, non-negotiable. And if we refuse," Elena's smile was colder than vacuum, "then you'll find out exactly why the galaxy calls us Death Worlders. And Ambassador, we earned that name." She walked out of the chamber. Behind her, the holographic display showed the human fleet crossing the halfway point. On Frontier Station, Katie Grant woke up crying for her mother. Lauren held her close, whispering promises that no one would ever hurt her again. 3 days away, thousands of humans were making sure those promises would be kept. Officer Kreven sat in his holding cell aboard Frontier Station, monitoring the news feeds on the small display they'd left him. His mandibles clicked nervously as he watched the updates scroll past. The Varathi High Command had issued a statement. They refused Earth's demands. Kreven's antennae drooped. Fools. They were all fools. He'd served in the Varatha security forces for 20 cycles. He'd patrolled 16 different stations, enforced protocols on a dozen species, maintained order across half the frontier. Never once had he encountered a species that responded like this. Most accepted authority. Most understood hierarchy. Not humans. The display updated. The human fleet had arrived in system. Kreven watched as 81 warships dropped out of faster-than-light travel in perfect formation. The Harbinger led them, a dreadnought-class vessel bristling with weapons that made Varathi cruisers look like shuttlecraft. Behind it came wave after wave of destroyers, frigates, carriers, and ships, whose classifications Kreven didn't even recognize. They weren't slowing down. "Attention Frontier Station," a voice crackled over every speaker in the facility. "This is Admiral Henry Blake of the United Earthship Harbinger. We are assuming control of this station under emergency military authority. All non-essential personnel are to evacuate immediately. You have 6 hours." Kreven's cell door hissed open. 2 human Marines stood outside, their armor matte black, their rifles held at ready positions. Behind their helmets, he couldn't see their faces. "On your feet," one said. Kreven rose slowly. "Where are you taking me?" "Transfer shuttle. You're going to Earth." The Confederation will never allow. The Marine's rifle didn't move, but his voice carried an edge that made Krevin's exoskeleton itch. Your Confederation just found out they don't get a vote. Move. They escorted him through corridors being rapidly cleared of civilians. Varathi diplomats rushed past, their robes trailing, their calm superiority replaced by panic. A Palaxian merchant dropped an entire crate of goods in his haste to reach the evacuation shuttles. Everywhere, species were learning the same lesson. When humans said move, you moved. At the docking bay, Krevin saw her. Katie Grant sat in a wheelchair, her head still bandaged, her mother standing behind her like a guardian statue. The girl looked small, fragile. Her eyes were red from crying. Krevin stopped walking. The Marines led him. "That's her," one Marine said quietly. "That's the kid you hit." Lauren Grant's eyes met Krevin's across the bay. There was no rage in them now, no fury. Just cold, absolute certainty. The look of someone who had won and knew it. "Keep moving," the other Marine said, nudging Krevin forward. As they passed, Katie looked up. For just a moment, their eyes met. She flinched, pressing closer to her mother. Krevin felt something he'd never experienced in 2 decades of service. Shame. They loaded him onto a transport with 12 other Varathi officers, all being recalled under the emergency order. Through the viewport, Krevin watched as Frontier Station transformed. Human ships docked at every available port. Marines poured out in organized waves, taking control of security stations, communications arrays, and power centers. In less than 3 hours, the humans had seized complete control. "Approaching Varatha cruiser," the pilot announced, transferring prisoners to Confederation custody. But the Varathi cruiser wasn't moving to intercept. It sat motionless, 300 kilometers from the station, surrounded by 5 human destroyers. Their weapons were locked on target. "Varathi vessel. This is Captain Diaz of the UES Scorpion," a human voice transmitted on open channels. "You are ordered to stand down and prepare for inspection. Any hostile action will be met with immediate destruction." Krevin watched as the Varathi captain complied. The cruiser's weapons powered down. Human boarding teams launched. Within the hour, every Varathi officer aboard that cruiser, including the captain, was transferred to human custody. "This is illegal," one of Krevin's fellow officers chittered. "They have no authority to—" "They have warships," Krevin said quietly. "That's the only authority that matters now." The transport changed course, burning hard toward the human fleet. Krevin saw the Harbinger growing larger in the viewport, a massive beast of metal and fury. Smaller ships moved around it like predators hunting in a pack. They docked in the Harbinger's brig. More Marines, more corridors, more cells. But these cells were different. Reinforced, monitored, built to hold dangerous prisoners. A human officer approached Krevin's cell after he was locked inside. She wore the insignia of a lieutenant commander, her uniform crisp despite the chaos of the past few days. "Officer Krevin," she said, "I'm Lieutenant Commander Patricia Hill. I'll be your liaison during transport to Earth. I want to speak to my embassy. Your embassy evacuated 4 hours ago. The Varathi Confederation has severed diplomatic relations with humanity rather than comply with our demands." Hill consulted her datapad. "You're being charged under Earth law with assault of a minor, abuse of authority, and attempted murder." "Attempted murder? I never tried to—" You pointed a weapon at a 9-year-old child's chest. "Under our law, that's attempted murder." Hill's voice was professional, almost gentle. "Your trial begins in 2 weeks. You'll have access to legal counsel. The proceedings will be broadcast across the entire galaxy." She turned to leave. "Why?" Krevin asked. "Why all this? She's just one juvenile. One minor injury. Why mobilize your entire fleet?" Hill stopped. When she looked back at him, her eyes were hard. "Because the next alien who thinks about hitting a human kid needs to know exactly what it will cost them." She walked away, her boots echoing on the deck plating. Krevin sat alone in his cell as the Harbinger broke orbit, carrying him toward Earth, toward justice, toward consequences he'd never imagined possible. Outside, the human fleet began establishing a permanent presence around Frontier Station. Marines patrolled the corridors. Human law replaced Galactic Council protocols. The message was clear. This station belonged to humanity now, and anyone who wanted to dispute that was welcome to try. The trial lasted 3 days and changed the galaxy forever. Kreven stood in the defendant's cage at the International Criminal Court in The Hague, watching as the prosecution presented their case. The courtroom was packed. Every major news network in known space had cameras pointed at him. Billions of beings across hundreds of worlds were watching. The prosecutor, a woman named Angela Curtis, played the security footage for the 7th time. Katie Grant walking down the corridor, looking lost. Kreven approaching. The conversation. Then the rifle butt crashing into her small head. Her body hitting the floor. Blood pooling on the deck. The human jury watched in silence. Their faces showed nothing, but Kreven could feel their hatred radiating like heat. The defense argues this was a proportional response to a protocol violation, Curtis said, her voice cutting through the chamber. Let's examine that claim. She brought up a hologram. Katie's medical scans filled the air above the courtroom. Fractured skull, damaged ear canal, traumatic brain injury, psychological trauma assessments showing severe anxiety and fear responses. This is what proportional looks like to the Varathi Confederation, Curtis continued. A 9-year-old girl who got lost, who asked for help, who was met with violence. Kreven's attorney, a Palaxian named Vorath, who specialized in interspecies law, stood to object. The officer acted within established security guidelines. Human children are not security threats. Curtis slammed her hand on the table. They're children! And in this court, under our law, there is no guideline, no protocol, no regulation that justifies what we saw on that footage. The judge, a stern woman named Judith Kane, nodded. Overruled. Continue, counselor. Curtis turned to face Kreven directly. Officer Kreven, you had multiple options. You could have escorted the child to safety. You could have called for her parents. You could have done literally anything except violence. But you chose to strike her. Why? Kreven's translator rendered his clicks into emotionless English. She was in a restricted zone. Deathworlders require firm correction to establish proper boundaries. The courtroom erupted. Kane's gavel cracked like thunder. Firm correction? Curtis's voice was deadly quiet now. You fractured a child's skull and call it correction? Among my people, discipline is, we're not among your people. You're among ours, and you harmed one of our children. Curtis gestured to the gallery. Katie Grant is here today. She wanted to face you. Every eye in the courtroom turned. Katie sat in the front row, her mother beside her. The bandages were gone now, replaced by a small scar above her left temple. She wore a simple blue dress. Her hands gripped her mother's arm tightly. Curtis walked over to her. Katie, can you tell the court what you remember? The girl's voice was small but clear. I was looking for the bathroom. I got turned around. The signs were all in different languages and I couldn't read them. She swallowed hard. I saw the officer and I thought he'd help me. I said I was lost. I said please. What happened next? He yelled at me. I tried to apologize. Then he hit me. Katie's voice cracked. It hurt so much. I thought I was going to die. I kept thinking about my dad and how he told me to always run if someone tries to hurt me, but I couldn't run because everything was spinning. Lauren Grant put her arm around her daughter. Several jury members were visibly struggling to maintain composure. Curtis returned to face Kreven. Do you have anything to say to her? Kreven looked at the small human child. He thought about cycles of service, about maintaining order, about all the justifications he'd constructed in his mind. Then he thought about that moment when their eyes met in the docking bay, about the fear in her face. I acted according to my training, he said finally. Wrong answer. The jury deliberated for 40 minutes. They returned with a verdict of guilty on all charges. The sentence was 20 years in a maximum security facility with no possibility of parole. But the trial's real impact came 3 hours later. The Galactic Council reconvened, and Ambassador Ross stood before them with a document that would reshape interstellar law. The Human Protection Act, she announced, distributing copies to every delegation, effective immediately across all human-controlled space and any station where human citizens are present. Chancellor Vrix scanned the document. his scales shifting to deep purple. This grants human security forces jurisdiction over any incident involving human children regardless of location? Correct. Any being who harms a human minor will be tried under Earth law, in Earth courts. Elena's expression was unyielding. We tried operating under Galactic Council regulations. Your systems failed to protect our children, so we're implementing our own. The Council will never ratify this, Shira protested, though her voice lacked conviction. We're not asking for ratification. We're informing you of new reality. Elena activated another display. As of this morning, 17 species have signed mutual protection agreements with Earth. They've agreed to adopt similar standards for child protection. 12 more are in negotiations. The display showed a growing web of alliances, all centered on humanity's single demand: protect the children. You're fracturing the Council, Vrick said quietly. No. We're showing the galaxy what our priorities are. Any species that shares those priorities is welcome to join us. Any species that doesn't? Elena's smile was sharp. They can explain to their own citizens why they think it's acceptable to harm children. Over the next week, 23 more species signed the agreements. The Galactic Council's authority crumbled as worlds realized humanity had offered something the Council never had: absolute protection for the vulnerable. On Earth, Katie Grant testified before the United Nations. Her story was broadcast to every human world, every colony, every station. By the time she finished speaking, volunteer enlistment in Earthfleet had tripled. The message was received across the galaxy. Humanity had drawn a line. Cross it at your own extinction. And in a cell on Earth, Officer Kreven watched the news feeds and understood that he hadn't just struck a child. He'd struck a match that ignited a revolution. 6 months after the trial, the Verithy Confederation made its final mistake. Ambassador Ross was reviewing protection treaty applications in her Geneva office when the alert came through. Her secure terminal flashed red, Priority Alpha. She opened the message and felt her blood turn to ice. Verithy Battlefleet detected entering the Kepler 442 system. Civilian colony. Population, 40,000. 22% children. They were going to make humanity pay for humiliating them. Ross grabbed her communicator. Get me Admiral Blake, now. The connection established in seconds. Blake's face appeared on screen, already grim. He'd seen the reports. They're not responding to hails, he said without preamble. 12 warships. They've taken up bombardment positions over New Providence Colony. How long until our fleet arrives? 19 hours. They know our response time. They planned this. Blake's jaw clenched. Elena, if they fire on that colony, they won't get the chance. Ross was already pulling up tactical displays. What assets do we have in system? 1 frigate. The UUS Defiant. Captain named Austin Reed. He's got a crew of 60 and he's facing a fleet that outguns him 50-1. Ross closed her eyes briefly, then opened them, resolve hardening into diamond. Tell Captain Reed to buy us those 19 hours, whatever it takes. On the bridge of the Defiant, Austin Reed received his orders and looked at his crew. They were young, eager, terrified. His tactical officer was barely 23. His chief engineer still had academy textbooks in her quarters. Sir, they're demanding the colony surrender, his communications officer reported. They want Governor Martinez and the entire Colonial Council handed over for war crimes tribunals. Reed knew what that meant. Show trials, executions, terror, broadcast across the galaxy to prove the Verithy still had power. Open a channel to the Verithy flagship, he ordered. The view screen lit up with the image of Admiral Threx, his mandibles clicking with satisfaction. Captain Reed. How wise of Earthfleet to send a representative. You will instruct the colony to... I'm instructing you to leave this system immediately, Reed interrupted. You have one chance. Take it. Threx's laugh was a chittering rasp. You command a single frigate against my battle fleet. You have no leverage, human. I have something better than leverage. I have a reason. Reed stood, walking closer to the view screen. 6 months ago, one of your people hit a little girl. Today you're threatening 40,000 civilians, including 8,000 children. You really want to find out what happens when you make that mistake twice? You cannot stop us. Your reinforcements are hours away. By then, you'll all be dead. Reed's voice was flat. I'm not here to stop you. I'm here to delay you. And if you fire one shot at that colony, I will ram my ship down your flagship's throat at full acceleration. Your shields won't stop a frigate moving at 0.95 light speed. We'll both die, but you'll die first. The Varathi Admiral's antennae twitched. You're bluffing. Try me. Reed gestured to his tactical officer. Helm, plot ramming course. All power to engines. Lock trajectory on the flagship. On the Defiant's main display, targeting solutions appeared. The ship began to turn, angling directly at Threx's command vessel. In engineering, the reactor output climbed toward maximum. Captain, they're powering weapons, Tactical reported. So are we. Maintain course. Down on New Providence, Governor Martinez watched from the Colonial Administration Building as the tiny human frigate positioned itself between the colony and certain death. Around her, 40,000 people held their breath. They're going to die for us, her aide whispered. They're going to buy us time, Martinez corrected. And we're going to make sure everyone remembers who did it. Aboard the Defiant, Reed opened ship-wide communications. All hands, this is the captain. The Varathi fleet has threatened New Providence Colony. They've threatened our people, our families, our children. Command says reinforcements are 19 hours out. I say we hold this line for 20. Who's with me? The response was immediate. Every station reported ready. Every crew member locked in. 60 humans against 12 warships, and not one of them considered retreat. Threx watched the human frigate accelerate toward his position and realized the truth. Reed wasn't bluffing. These Death Worlders would actually do it. They'd sacrifice themselves without hesitation if it meant protecting those colonists. Admiral, if they impact at that velocity, his tactical officer began. I know what happens, Threx snapped. His calculations were simple. He could destroy the Defiant easily, but not before it reached ramming speed. Not before it turned his flagship into expanding debris. He had 12 ships. Humanity had one. But that one ship was crewed by beings who didn't calculate odds. They calculated loyalty. Fleet, target the frigate. Prepare to... Admiral, new contacts! The tactical officer's voice carried panic. Civilian ships emerging from the colony. Hundreds of them. They're moving to intercept our fleet. On every screen, the truth became visible. Mining vessels, cargo haulers, personal yachts, survey ships. Every spacecraft in the New Providence system was launching, forming a wall between the Varathi fleet and the colony. Farmers, teachers, merchants, none of them military. All of them armed with whatever they could mount. Martinez's voice broadcast across all frequencies. Varathi fleet, this is Governor Martinez. You want our children? Come through us first. Every single one of us. Threx stared at the display. Over 400 civilian ships flying directly toward his battle fleet. Most wouldn't survive a single salvo. They knew it. They came anyway. This is madness, he whispered. No, Reed corrected over the open channel. This is humanity. And you just reminded us why we fight. The standoff held for 17 minutes. 473 civilian vessels and 1 military frigate against 12 Varathi warships. The galaxy watched, breathless. Then the Varathi fleet turned and jumped to faster-than-light travel. They'd learned the lesson too late. You don't threaten human children. Not ever. When Admiral Blake arrived 19 hours later with the Third Fleet, he found the colony intact. Captain Reed's crew being celebrated as heroes, and a message already spreading across every human world. We protect our own. All of us. Always. The Varathi Confederation never threatened a human colony again. The galaxy changed in the year that followed. It started with whispers, then requests, then delegations arriving at Earth with a question humanity never expected to hear. Teach us. Ambassador Ross stood in the new Interspecies Child Protection Bureau headquarters in Brussels, addressing representatives from 67 different species. The chamber was designed to accommodate wildly different physiologies. aquatic tanks for the Hydrians, low-gravity platforms for the Etheri, heated zones for cold-blooded species, but they all had one thing in common: they'd brought their children. When we established the Human Protection Act, Ross began, we thought we were alone in this. We thought other species would see it as aggression, as overreach. We were wrong. A Krovan delegate raised a tentacle. Ambassador, my people have studied your response protocols, the speed of your mobilization, the unity of purpose. We want to understand how you achieved this. Ross smiled. It's not complicated. We decided our children matter more than politics, more than profit, more than pride. But the cost, a Palaxian interjected, his scales shimmering with uncertainty. Your economy took significant losses when you severed trade with species that wouldn't sign protection agreements. Your military is stretched thin protecting colonies. How do you justify? Stop. The voice came from the back of the chamber. Lauren Grant stepped forward, Katie beside her. The room fell silent. You want to know the cost? Lauren's eyes swept the assembly. My daughter had nightmares for 3 months. She couldn't sleep without lights on. She flinched every time she saw someone in uniform. That's the cost of not protecting children. So yes, we spent resources. We mobilized fleets. We made enemies. And we'd do it again tomorrow. Katie spoke up, her voice stronger now than it had been in the courtroom. After the trial, I got messages. Thousands of them. From kids on other worlds. Saying thank you. Saying they felt safer knowing humans were watching. One kid from a Palaxian colony said it was the first time anyone stood up for them when an adult hurt them. She looked directly at the Palaxian delegate. What's that worth to you? The delegate's scales shifted through a dozen colors before settling on deep blue. Shame. Everything, he said quietly. Ross continued. We're not saying our system is perfect. We're saying we're willing to fight for it, and we're offering to help you build your own. Over the next months, the transformation spread. The Palaxian Assembly passed the Juvenile Protection Mandate. The Krovan Collective established child advocacy councils on every habitat. Even species without traditional family structures began implementing safeguards. But not everyone was pleased. The Khazir Empire watched these developments with growing alarm. They were an old power, built on strict hierarchies and absolute obedience. The idea that children deserved special protection contradicted everything their culture valued. Their ambassador, a towering figure named Vector, confronted Ross in a private meeting. You're destabilizing the galactic order, he growled, his translator barely capturing his contempt. This obsession with juveniles weakens species, makes them soft. Ross met his gaze without flinching. Then stay weak on your side of the border. Just keep your people away from ours. We have trade agreements, mutual defense pacts. You cannot simply watch us. Ross slid a document across the table. The Khazir Empire has rejected every protection standard we've proposed. Your military uses child soldiers. Your labor practices employ juveniles in hazardous conditions. As of today, all agreements between humanity and the Khazir Empire are suspended. Vector's claws scraped the table. You would risk war over this? We've already established we would. The question is whether you would. Ross leaned forward. Your empire spans 14 systems. You have a powerful military. But ask yourself, do you really want to fight a species that will cross the galaxy to avenge one injured child? Because that's what you'll get. The Khazir ambassador left without responding. 3 weeks later, an incident occurred in the Tau Ceti system. A Khazir transport was caught smuggling children from impoverished worlds, selling them into labor contracts that amounted to slavery. The ship was intercepted by the UES Vigilant, a destroyer on patrol. Captain Sarah Winters ordered the Khazir vessel to surrender. They refused. They opened fire. The Vigilant destroyed them in 47 seconds. Aboard the transport, they found 63 children. 17 species, ages ranging from 4 to 14, all of them terrified. All of them malnourished, several showed signs of abuse. The Khazir Empire demanded the return of their ship's crew who had survived in escape pods. They demanded compensation for the destroyed vessel. They demanded Captain Winters face charges for excessive force. Admiral Blake's response was broadcast on every news network in known space. No, just that one word. No explanation, no justification, no negotiation. The children were brought to Earth. Medical teams treated their injuries. Psychologists helped them process trauma. Linguists worked around the clock to communicate with species humanity had barely encountered. And slowly, carefully, each child was contacted by their families or placed with foster homes among species who'd signed the protection agreements. One of them was a small Palaxian girl named Siva. She'd been taken from her colony 3 years ago, sold to work in a mining operation. She was 8 years old and had forgotten what her parents looked like. Katie Grant visited her in the recovery center. "Hi," Katie said softly, sitting across from a small, reptilian child. "I'm Katie. I know you're scared. I was scared too." Siva's scales rippled with uncertain colors. "They said humans are dangerous, that you eat other species." Katie laughed, the sound gentle. "We don't eat people. We protect them, especially kids." She reached into her bag and pulled out a stuffed animal, a small blue bear. "This helped me feel safe. Maybe it'll help you too." Siva took the bear carefully, her claws barely gripping the soft fabric. "Why do you care?" "I'm not human." "Because you're a kid." "That's enough." 3 days later, Shiva was reunited with her parents. The footage of that reunion, broadcast across the Palaxian Assembly, sparked protests on every Palaxian world. Within a month, their government had severed all ties with the Khazar Empire and formally joined humanity's protection coalition. The message was spreading: protect children or face isolation. But in the shadows, the Khazar Empire was planning something darker. Something that would test humanity's resolve like never before. In a secured military facility deep in Khazar space, Vektar stood before Emperor Krazov and presented his proposal. "We cannot defeat humanity in direct conflict," he admitted, "but we can prove their protection systems are unsustainable. We can show the galaxy that their moral crusade is fantasy." The Emperor's eyes gleamed. "How?" "We take one of theirs, a child, somewhere they cannot reach in time, somewhere that will force them to choose between their principles and their power." Vektar activated a display showing a remote colony on the edge of human space. Small, isolated, minimal defenses, and it has a school with 200 human children. "You're proposing we attack a school?" Even the Emperor hesitated. "I'm proposing we call their bluff." The order was given in secret. The assault was planned in darkness, and humanity was about to show the Khazar exactly what happened when you made them choose. The Khazar strike force approached New Haven Colony under stealth protocols, expecting minimal resistance. They got Principal Angela Morrison instead. Morrison had taught elementary school for 17 years before moving to New Haven. She believed in patience, kindness, and the fundamental goodness of children. She also believed in the Second Amendment and kept a pulse rifle under her desk. The first alarm triggered at 0400 local time. Morrison was already awake, reviewing lesson plans. The security alert lit up her terminal. Unauthorized ships entering orbit. Military signatures. Khazar. She pressed the school-wide emergency button. Throughout New Haven Primary, lights blazed to life. Teachers who'd been sleeping in staff quarters grabbed go-bags that contained more than textbooks. Parents who lived nearby rushed toward the school, drawn by the same drills they'd practiced monthly. Morrison opened the intercom. Her voice was steady. "Code Starfall. This is not a drill. All protocols are now active." On the Khazar flagship, Commander Thexkull watched his tactical display with satisfaction. The colony was small, poorly defended. Their single orbital platform had already been disabled. This would be over quickly. Deploy ground forces to the school. Take the children. Kill anyone who resists. 6 dropships launched toward New Haven Primary. They made it halfway to the ground before the first one exploded. Morrison stood on the school roof with a shoulder-mounted launcher that technically wasn't legal for civilian use. She'd purchased it anyway, buried in the colony's defensive equipment requisition as educational supplies. She fired again. Another dropship spiraled into the forest, burning. "Morrison!" Her vice principal, a man named Frank Chen, scrambled onto the roof beside her. "I've got the children in the bunkers. 43 teachers, armed and positioned. Parents are arriving with whatever weapons they have." "Good," Morrison reloaded. "Send a message to Earth Fleet. Tell them we're under attack and we're holding. They're 19 hours out. Then we hold for 19 hours. The remaining 4 dropships scattered, coming down at different points around the school. Khazir soldiers poured out, heavily armed, and expecting easy targets. What they got was 200 human adults who'd spent 6 months preparing for exactly this scenario. Teacher Julie Brennan taught first grade. She was 32 years old, loved poetry, and had never hurt anyone in her life. She shot 3 Khazir soldiers before they reached the east entrance, her hands shaking but her aim steady. Coach Marcus Williams taught physical education. He was a former Marine who'd retired to New Haven for the quiet life. He set up a defensive position in the gymnasium with 4 other parents and enough ammunition to hold off a platoon. The Khazir had expected sheep. They'd gotten wolves. "Bunker status?" Morrison asked through her communicator, firing at movement in the tree line. Chen's voice crackled back. 207 children secured, ages 5 through 12. They're scared but following protocols. Miss Peterson is reading them stories to keep them calm. Below, in the reinforced bunker that had been built into the school's foundation, second-grade teacher Melissa Peterson sat surrounded by terrified children. Some were crying, others sat in shocked silence. One little boy named Danny kept asking for his mom. "Your mom is upstairs making sure we're safe," Peterson said gently, pulling him close. "And she's very, very good at her job. Now who wants to hear about the brave knight who protected the castle?" Tiny hands raised in the darkness. On the surface, the battle intensified. Thexgal watched in disbelief as his forces took casualties. These were civilians, teachers. How were they mounting this kind of resistance? "Commander, we've lost 43 soldiers. The humans have fortified positions throughout the complex. They're using the building itself as a defensive structure. Then bring the building down. Level it. Sir, the children are inside. That's the point." Thexkal's roar echoed through the bridge. "They surrender or we bury their offspring in rubble." The Khazir fleet powered weapons, targeting the school. Morrison saw the energy signatures building and knew what was coming. She grabbed her communicator. "All personnel, evacuate to bunkers. Now!" Teachers abandoned their positions, rushing toward the underground shelters. Parents grabbed weapons and ammunition, dragging them below. Coach Williams was the last one down, sealing the reinforced doors just as the first bombardment hit. The school above them disintegrated. Explosions tore through classrooms where children had learned their numbers, through the library where they'd discovered books, through the cafeteria where they'd shared lunches and laughter. Everything Morrison had built over 7 years vanished in fire and smoke. But below ground, in bunkers designed to survive orbital strikes, 207 children huddled together in the darkness, and 43 adults stood between them and the surface, weapons ready. "Is everyone okay?" Morrison called out, her ears ringing from the impacts. Voices reported back. "A few injuries. Nothing critical. All children accounted for." Thexkal sent soldiers into the ruins expecting to find bodies. Instead, he found sealed bunker entrances and automated defenses that his intelligence had never detected. "They built this place as a fortress," his tactical officer reported. "Sir, we can't breach those bunkers without heavy equipment, and even then, how long until Earth reinforcements arrive? 17 hours. Sexcall made his decision. Bring siege equipment. Position it above the bunker entrances. Tell the humans they have 1 hour to surrender the children, or we'll flood the bunkers with poison gas." The message was transmitted to Morrison's communicator. She listened to Thexcall's demands and felt something cold settle in her chest. Not fear. Not anymore. This was beyond fear. This was the moment every teacher dreaded. The nightmare scenario where she'd have to choose between her principles and her students' lives. "Mrs. Morrison?" Chen's voice was quiet. "What do we do?" Morrison looked at the children huddled in the bunker's main chamber. Danny had fallen asleep against Peterson's shoulder. how a little girl named Maya was drawing pictures with crayons they'd stored in emergency supplies. 2 boys were playing rock, paper, scissors by flashlight, trying to stay brave. She thought about Katie Grant, about the trial, about Captain Reed positioning his frigate against impossible odds, about every human who'd drawn a line and refused to cross it. Then she checked her ammunition count and smiled. "We hold," Morrison said, "for 17 more hours, and we show these bastards what happens when you threaten a teacher's classroom." She opened a channel to Thek's call. "This is Principal Morrison. Here's my counteroffer. Leave now, and maybe you'll survive long enough to tell your Emperor what a mistake this was. Because every second you stay here, Earthfleet gets closer. And when they arrive, they won't be interested in prisoners." Thexcall's laughter was harsh. "You're trapped underground, with limited supplies and no reinforcements. You're in no position to... I'm in exactly the position that matters. I'm standing between you and 200 children, and I'm not moving." She closed the channel and turned to her staff. "Everyone check your weapons. Ration the water and food. Get some rest in shifts." Morrison's voice carried the same authority she used when organizing field trips. "We've got 17 hours until the cavalry arrives. Let's show them we didn't need rescuing in the first place." Above them, Kazir's siege equipment moved into position. Below, 43 teachers prepared to defend their students until their last breath. And 17 hours away, Admiral Blake received Morrison's message and ordered the Third Fleet to maximum acceleration. The engines would burn out. They didn't care. Every ship in range diverted to New Haven. The Kazir had wanted to test humanity's resolve. They were about to get their answer. Dash. The siege lasted 14 hours before Earthfleet arrived early. Admiral Blake had pushed his ships past safe limits, burning through fuel reserves and straining reactors to the breaking point. The Harbinger dropped out of faster-than-light travel, with hull plating glowing red from the stress, followed by 73 warships that had done the same. They entered the New Haven system like avenging angels. "Kazir Fleet, this is Admiral Henry Blake," he transmitted on all frequencies. "You have 60 seconds to power down weapons and prepare for boarding. After that, we start shooting. And we don't stop until you're atoms." Texgull looked at his tactical display. 14 Kazir warships against 74 human vessels. His troops on the ground were still trying to breach the bunkers, still meeting fierce resistance from teachers who refused to surrender. He'd underestimated everything about humanity. "Admiral Blake, we are conducting legitimate military operations against 50 seconds. You cannot simply attack without 40 seconds. Thexgull's communications officer interrupted. "Sir, we're receiving a transmission from the surface. It's coming from inside the bunker." The channel opened. Principal Morrison's voice filled the Kazir bridge. "Admiral Blake, this is Angela Morrison, principal of New Haven Primary. Status report. 207 children secure and unharmed. 43 staff members armed and holding. We've repelled 6 breaching attempts. Current ammunition levels at 37%. Water supply sufficient for another 20 hours. Morale is high." Blake's response was immediate. "Outstanding work, Principal Morrison. Can you hold for another 30 minutes while we clear the orbit?" "Sir, we can hold as long as you need. These kids aren't going anywhere except home." Texgull heard the steel in that human's voice and finally understood. This wasn't military training. This wasn't tactical conditioning. This was something his species had never developed, the absolute unwillingness to surrender children to harm. "Admiral, we withdraw," he said quickly. "We are powering down weapons and recalling ground forces." "Denied." Blake's voice was colder than space. "You attacked a school. You targeted children. There is no withdrawal. There is only surrender and judgment. But we haven't actually harmed. You tried. That's enough. The human fleet opened fire. It wasn't a battle. It was an execution. The Kazir ships attempted to flee, but human destroyers had already positioned themselves at every jump point. The Kazir attempted to fight, but their weapons couldn't penetrate shields that humanity had reinforced specifically for protecting colony worlds. The Kazir attempted to surrender, but Blake had meant what he said. They'd crossed the line, and humanity was done showing mercy. Within 20 minutes, 12 Khazir warships were disabled and drifting. 2 had been destroyed outright when they'd tried to fire on the surface. Fexcal's flagship sat dead in space, its crew awaiting boarding parties. On the ground, Khazir soldiers dropped their weapons when Marine dropships descended like metallic rain. There was no fight left in them. They'd watched their fleet die. They knew what came next. Morrison received the all-clear signal and unsealed the bunker doors. Sunlight poured in for the first time in 14 hours. Fresh air replaced the recycled atmosphere. Above them, the school they'd loved was gone, but the children were alive. 207 kids emerged, blinking into the light, holding hands with teachers who'd refused to let them go. Parents rushed forward from the Marine perimeter, scooping up their children crying with relief. Morrison stood at the bunker entrance and watched the reunions. Her hands were still shaking from adrenaline. Her shoulder ached from the rifle's recoil. Her throat was raw from giving orders and encouragement for 14 straight hours. Admiral Blake's shuttle touched down near the ruined school. He stepped out in full-dress uniform and walked directly to Morrison. She saluted awkwardly, still holding her rifle. Blake returned the salute crisply. Then, breaking every military protocol, he pulled her into a brief embrace. "You saved them," he said quietly. "All of them. We just held the line, sir." "You did the saving." "No, Principal Morrison. You showed the galaxy what it means to be human." Blake stepped back and gestured to the Marines forming up behind him. "These troops will secure the area. Medical teams are setting up triage. We'll have temporary housing established within 6 hours, and a new school built within 3 months." Morrison nodded, exhaustion finally catching up with her. "The children will be evaluated, treated, and reunited with their families." "In that order." Blake's expression hardened. "And the Khazira will answer for this." "Every single one of them." The trials began 3 weeks later. Fexcal and his officers were brought before the same court that had tried Officer Krevin. The charges were extensive: attempted kidnapping, assault with intent to harm minors, destruction of educational facilities, and war crimes. The prosecution played surveillance footage from the school's security systems, which had continued recording even during the bombardment. The jury watched teachers shield children with their own bodies. They watched Morrison fire desperately at dropships. They watched Julie Brennan, the poetry-loving first-grade teacher, weep as she reloaded her rifle between firefights. And they watched the moment when little Danny had asked Melissa Peterson if the bad aliens were going to hurt them, and she'd answered with absolute conviction, "No, sweetie, because your teachers won't let that happen." The jury deliberated for 2 hours, guilty on all counts. The sentence was life imprisonment for the officers, complete dismantlement of the strike force's chain of command, and a permanent ban on Khazir military presence within 50 light-years of any human settlement. But the real consequence came from an unexpected source. Emperor Krasoth himself appeared via hologram before the Galactic Council, his image broadcast across every world in known space. The proud ancient ruler of the Khazir Empire stood before the assembly and did something no Khazir emperor had done in 3,000 years. He apologized. "We sought to test humanity's resolve," Krasoth said, his translator carefully rendering each word. "We believed their protection of children was performance, political theater. We were wrong." He paused, and something almost like respect entered his voice. "A species that inspires teachers to become warriors, that turns schools into fortresses, that mobilizes fleets across the galaxy for their young. Such a species cannot be broken, should not be challenged." He looked directly into the camera, knowing humans across the galaxy were watching. "We have studied your history, your wars, your sacrifices, and we understand now what makes you dangerous. It is not your weapons. It is not your ships. It is your absolute refusal to abandon those you have sworn to protect." Krasoth inclined his head in something approaching a bow. "The Khazir Empire hereby petitions to join the Child Protection Coalition. We will adopt your standards. We will reform our practices, and we will never again mistake compassion for weakness." The request was accepted after significant negotiation and oversight requirements. But the real change happened quietly, across 1,000 worlds. Species that had remained neutral suddenly signed protection agreements. Governments that had resisted reform began implementing safeguards. Parents across the galaxy started demanding that their leaders prioritize children's safety. And on Earth, Principal Angela Morrison received the Medal of Valor from the United Nations. When asked what she'd say to other teachers watching, she answered simply, "Our job is to protect children and help them grow. Everything else is negotiable. But that part, that's non-negotiable. And if you're not willing to fight for it, find another profession." 6 months later, New Haven Primary reopened in a building designed to be both school and fortress. Over the entrance, Morrison installed a plaque with a simple inscription, "We held the line." Every child who walked through those doors understood what it meant, and across the galaxy, so did everyone else. 5 years after Officer Kreven struck Katie Grant, the galaxy gathered for an event that would have seemed impossible before. The first Galactic Summit on Child Welfare convened on neutral ground, Station Unity, a massive construct built cooperatively by 47 species. At its center stood a monument, a simple statue of a child, species indeterminate, reaching upward toward the stars. Katie Grant, now 14 years old, stood before that monument with her mother beside her. She'd been asked to speak. The assembly hall held representatives from every major civilization. Verithi diplomats sat near the back, notably subdued. Khazar officials occupied a section they'd specifically requested. Closest to the human delegation, a symbolic gesture of their reformed alliance. Palaxians, Crovans, Hydrians, Etheri, and dozens of others filled the remaining seats. Chancellor Vrix called the summit to order, his scales displaying calm blue. 5 years ago, a single act of violence against a child reshaped our civilization. Today we gather to honor not just what we've built, but why we built it. He gestured to Katie. Our opening speaker needs no introduction. Katie Grant. Katie walked to the podium, her steps confident. The scar above her temple had faded, but remained visible. She wore it without shame. "I was 9 years old when Officer Kreven hit me," she began, her voice steady and clear. "I remember being scared, confused. I didn't understand why an adult would hurt me for asking for help." She paused, looking out at the thousands of beings watching. But what happened after changed everything. She activated a display behind her. It showed statistics, numbers that told a story. Before the incident, child abuse cases across galactic council space, 4 million reported annually. Estimated unreported, 20 million. Convictions, 43,000. The numbers shifted. After implementation of protection standards, reported cases increased to 12 million as victims gained courage to come forward. Convictions, 6.2 million. Child mortality from abuse, down 73% across participating species. Katie let those numbers sink in. My mom broke the arms of the person who hurt me. Admiral Blake brought a fleet. Principal Morrison held a bunker for 14 hours. Captain Reed faced down a battle group with 1 ship. She smiled slightly. Everyone asks if they overreacted, if maybe humanity went too far, and I want to answer that question directly. She touched the scar on her temple. They reacted exactly right. Because every child who's been saved in the past 5 years, every kid who's been protected, every parent who now knows their children are valued, they exist because humanity drew a line and refused to cross it. Katie's voice strengthened. So no, they didn't overreact. They showed the galaxy what children are worth. The hall was silent. But we're not done, Katie continued. There are still species outside the coalition. Still worlds where children are property, not people. Still places where asking for help gets you hurt. She looked directly at the remaining neutral delegations. And I want to speak to them directly. She stepped out from behind the podium, young but utterly composed. You think protection standards are too expensive, too difficult, too disruptive to your cultures. You think humanity is imposing our values, forcing our way of life onto others. Katie's expression hardened. You're right, we are, because some values are universal, and protecting children is one of them. A murmur ran through the assembly. My species has a saying. The true measure of a civilization is how it treats its most vulnerable. We're measuring you right now, all of you, And history will remember how you respond. Katie gestured to the monument behind her. That statue doesn't show a human child. It shows every child. Because that's what this is about. Not human children. Not Palaxian children. All children. She returned to the podium and pulled up a final image. It showed Officer Krevin in his prison cell, alongside Thexcall and the other Khazir commanders. Then it shifted to show Principal Morrison teaching a class in the rebuilt New Haven Primary. Then to Captain Reed, now Admiral Reed, accepting a medal. Then to Lauren Grant, working as a child safety advocate. These people made choices, Katie said. Some chose violence. Some chose protection. And the galaxy responded to those choices. We built this coalition. We changed laws. We saved millions of lives. She looked out at the assembly one last time. But the real question is, what choice will you make next? Katie stepped down from the podium to absolute silence. Then Lauren Grant stood and began to applaud. Admiral Blake joined her. Then Ambassador Ross. Then every human in the hall. The sound spread as other species rose. Palaxians, their scales flashing approval. Crovans, their tentacles creating rhythmic patterns. Even the Varathi delegation stood, clicking their mandibles in their version of respect. Within minutes, the entire assembly was on their feet. By the end of the summit, 17 more species had signed the protection accords. But Katie's impact extended beyond politics. That evening, she met privately with a group that had requested her time. Children from worlds that had recently joined the coalition. 36 kids from different species, all of them survivors of abuse that was now illegal in their homes. They sat in a circle in one of Unity Station's gardens, surrounded by plants from 100 worlds. Katie listened as each child told their story. A young Crovan who'd been forced into labor. A Palaxian girl who'd been struck for failing academic standards. An Aethery boy who'd been isolated and starved for religious violations. Each story was different. Each one was heartbreaking, and each one ended the same way. And then the humans came. When they finished, one of them asked the question they'd all been thinking. Why did your people care about us? We're not human. Katie thought about her mother's fury, about Admiral Blake's fleet, about Morrison's stand, about everything that had happened because one person had hurt one child. Because children are children, she said simply. It doesn't matter what you look like, where you're from, or what species you are. When someone hurts a kid, it's wrong. And my people decided that wrong is worth fighting against. A small Varathi child, barely 6 years old, approached hesitantly. Are you afraid of my people? After what Officer Krevin did, Katie knelt down to the child's level. I was afraid of Krevin, not because he was Varathi, because he was someone who hurt me. But you? She smiled gently. You're just a kid, like I was, like I still am. The Varathi child hugged her. Later that night, Katie stood with her mother on Unity Station's observation deck, watching ships from dozens of species docking and departing. Do you think it'll last? Katie asked. The coalition, the protections, all of it. Lauren put her arm around her daughter. I think we proved something these past 5 years. We proved that protecting children isn't just about laws or treaties. It's about people deciding what matters. She looked down at Katie. You mattered enough that Captain Reed risked his ship. That Morrison held a bunker. That Blake mobilized a fleet. And now millions of other kids matter the same way. Because you broke someone's arms for me, I'd do it again. Lauren's voice carried absolute conviction every time. Without hesitation, they stood together, watching the galaxy turn. Below them, in Unity Station's archives, the recordings of Katie's speech were being copied and distributed to every world in known space. Within days, her words would reach billions. Her message would inspire movements, spark reforms, and give courage to countless children who'd never had a voice. Officer Krevin watched that speech from his cell on Earth. He understood now what he'd done. Not just hitting a child, not just breaking laws. He'd awakened something in humanity that refused to go back to sleep. In the Khazir Empire, Emperor Krasov mandated that Katie's speech be shown in every school. His people needed to understand what they'd learned, that compassion wasn't weakness, That protecting the vulnerable wasn't soft. That a civilization's strength was measured by how fiercely it defended those who couldn't defend themselves. And on 1,000 worlds, in 1,000,000 homes, parents held their children a little tighter, grateful that the galaxy had finally learned what humanity had known all along. Some lines should never be crossed, and the one protecting children was written in stone. 20 years after the incident that changed the galaxy, Katie Grant stood in a very different place. The Interstellar Academy for Child Advocacy occupied an entire moon orbiting Earth. Its students came from 73 species, all training to become protectors, counselors, and voices for children across known space. Katie, now 29, served as its director. She walked through corridors where human instructors taught Kaiser students the psychology of trauma recovery, where Palaxian professors lectured on legal frameworks alongside Varathi experts in conflict de-escalation, where former soldiers like Captain Reed, now retired Admiral Reed, trained the next generation in protection protocols that balanced force with compassion. But today was special. Officer Krevin was being released from prison. He'd served 20 years, not a day less. The parole board had denied him early release 17 times, but Earth law was clear. His sentence was complete. He would walk free. Katie had requested to meet him. They sat across from each other in a simple visitation room. Krevin looked old now, his exoskeleton dulled, his movements slow. 20 years in human confinement had broken something in him that could never be repaired. "You asked to see me," Krevin said, his translator rendering his clicks with the same emotionless precision it had during his trial. "Why?" Katie studied him. She remembered the fear she'd felt at 9 years old, the pain, the confusion, but she also remembered everything that had come after, the changes, the lives saved, the galaxy transformed. "Because I wanted to tell you something," she said. "I forgive you." Krevin's antennae twitched in surprise. "I don't understand. I spent years angry, scared, having nightmares. But I also watched my mother testify about protection. I watched Admiral Blake defend colonies. I watched Principal Morrison teach a new generation how to be brave." Katie leaned forward. "You hurt me, but you also accidentally started something that saved millions of children, so I forgive you. Not because you deserve it, because I choose not to carry that anger anymore." Krevin was silent for a long moment. "I wish I could undo what I did. You can't. But you can do something else." Katie slid a document across the table. "When you leave here, you'll be deported back to the Varathi Confederation. They've requested you return. But I'm offering you another option." Krevin looked at the document. It was a contract. "Employment at the Interstellar Academy." "You want me to work for you? I want you to teach," Katie corrected. "You represent the old way of thinking. The belief that discipline required violence, that control required fear. Our students need to understand that mindset so they can recognize it, confront it, and change it. You trust me around children?" "No," Katie said honestly. "You'll never be unsupervised. You'll never have authority over students. You'll be a case study, a cautionary tale, a living reminder of what happens when you value order over compassion." She met his eyes. "But you'll also have a chance to contribute to something better, to help prevent other officers from making your mistake." Krevin looked at the contract, then at the young woman he'd harmed 2 decades ago. "Why would you give me this opportunity?" "Because the galaxy doesn't need more punishment. It needs more understanding." Katie stood. "You have 48 hours to decide. Choose wisely." She left him there, staring at the contract. 2 days later, Krevin signed it. He became the Academy's most controversial instructor, teaching a mandatory course called The Cost of Violence. Students learned about his crime, watched footage of the trial, studied the cascade of consequences that had followed one moment of brutality, and slowly, grudgingly, they learned from him. But Katie's work extended far beyond the Academy. The Child Protection Coalition now encompassed 147 species. Abuse rates had declined by 89% across member worlds. New protocols had been established for reporting, intervention, and rehabilitation. The galaxy had fundamentally transformed its relationship with its youngest citizens. Yet challenges remained. A new species, the Xerathi, had recently made contact with the galactic community. They were advanced, wealthy, and powerful. They were also hesitant to join the coalition. Ambassador Ross, now elderly but still sharp, brought Katie to the negotiations. The Xerathi representative, a crystalline being named Kor, explained their concerns. Your standards conflict with our traditional coming-of-age rituals. We cannot simply abandon practices that have defined our culture for millennia. Katie listened to the description of these rituals. Physical trials, isolation, challenges that left permanent scars. How old are your children when they undergo these trials? She asked. Between 7 and 9 cycles, Kor replied. And do they have a choice? Kor's crystalline structure pulsed with confusion. They are children. Choice is irrelevant. Katie pulled up footage on a display. It showed her at 9 years old being struck by Kreven. Then it showed the trial, the fleets, the battles, the transformation of the galaxy. This is what happened when one officer decided that a child's choice was irrelevant, she said quietly. This is what humanity did in response. Now imagine what we'll do if an entire species institutionalizes child suffering. Core structure flickered uncertainly. You would threaten war over cultural practices? No. Katie's voice was gentle but unyielding. I'm explaining what will happen. Not as a threat, as a fact. Humanity has made its position clear. Children deserve protection, dignity, and choice. When those principles are violated, we respond. We always respond. She leaned forward. But here's what you're missing. We're not asking you to abandon your culture. We're asking you to evolve it. Make your trials voluntary. Provide alternatives. Celebrate children who choose different paths. Honor strength of character, not just strength through suffering. That would fundamentally change what it means to be Xerathi. Good, Katie said simply, because what it currently means is harming children. And that's not a culture worth preserving. The negotiations lasted 6 months. The Xerathi studied humanity's history, watched documentaries about Katie's story, spoke with children from other reformed species. Slowly, their perspective shifted. They joined the coalition with modified rituals that honored tradition while protecting children. And Katie added another species to the growing list of civilizations that had chosen evolution over extinction. On her 30th birthday, Katie stood on Luna Station, looking down at Earth. Her mother was beside her now, gray-haired but still fierce. Admiral Blake attended via hologram, too frail for travel but determined to be present. Principal Morrison sent a message from New Haven, where she still taught. Do you ever regret how your life turned out? Lauren asked her daughter. You could have done anything. Ben, anything. Instead, you've spent 2 decades fighting the same battle. Katie thought about the question. She thought about the children she'd helped, the species she'd convinced, the reforms she'd championed, the scars she still carried, both visible and hidden. I regret that it was necessary, she said finally. I regret that the galaxy needed to learn this lesson. But regret my choices? Never. She smiled at her mother. You taught me that protecting children matters more than anything else. I'm just living that lesson. Lauren pulled her daughter close. I'm proud of you. Your father would be too. Where is Dad anyway? Classified mission. Admiral stuff. Lauren grinned. But he sent you something. She handed Katie a small package. Inside was a medal. The same Medal of Valor that Morrison had received, that Reed had been awarded, that dozens of humans who'd defended children had earned. But this one was different. Engraved on the back were simple words. For Katie Grant, you didn't just survive. You changed everything. That night, across the galaxy, children slept safely in their beds, protected by laws Katie had helped write, defended by advocates she'd helped train, living in a civilization she'd helped build. Officer Kreven sat in his small apartment on the academy grounds, reviewing lesson plans for the next semester. His students would arrive tomorrow, ready to learn why his actions 20 years ago had been wrong and why they could never be allowed to happen again. The Khazir Empire celebrated its annual Day of Protection, honoring the children who'd been rescued from their own military's mistakes. The Varathi Confederation maintained the Cady Grant Memorial Scholarship, funding education for children across their territories. And on 1,000 Worlds, parents told their children the story of the little girl who got lost looking for a bathroom. Cady Grant stood at her window watching Earth turn below, and knew that the line her species had drawn would hold. Because some things were worth fighting for, and she